playing a giant game of Monopoly where at the end of the night, I'd be out on the street, not in my bed cozy. So the world that we've created is this distrust of self, belief that we have to hand over our fate to this infallible law that is actually based on one rule: highest return to existing wealth. So wealth accrues to wealth accrues to wealth until not Francis Lappe, but the researchers at Citigroup in 2005 wrote a memo, which was on the web, now off the web, wrote a memo that said, we are now a plutonomy. The top 1% controlling as much as the bottom 90% put together. So there we are. We end up, from this fear of scarcity, then creating the experience of scarcity. As now you saw the papers a few days ago, those 3 years at the height of from the beginning to the height of the current recession, the median American household lost 40% of its wealth. So we end up creating the experience of scarcity amid plenty. So this is this worldview premised in lack. And the reason that it is so deadly is not that simply that it concentrates wealth, creating the experience of scarcity. Half of our children in the US will at some point be on food stamps now in their lives, despite the fact that we are the world's preeminent food exporter. So it creates the experience of scarcity, but as we now see, it infuses and infects our political system so that we end up not with the democracy that we grow up being taught about, but with what I've come to call privately held government. I think that's the best description. And so we end up actually then creating rules that reinforce that cycle of concentrated power. So that is one way that this premise of lack ends up creating a feeling of powerlessness, because we give over our power to a force that concentrates power. So what am I really saying? This is really what I want to leave you with, that our crisis is not ecological ignorance or human greed. It is that the way we've been taught to see the world, is perversely aligned with human nature and with the laws of nature. And that's what I'm going to talk about for just a moment. So what do I mean? Okay. So, what perversely aligned with our nature? Well, first, this is really the foundation. That human beings, we know we are complex creatures. We know we are complex creatures. We know that not a few of us, but most of us, in certain conditions, will behave with incredible callous neglect. Just think today, 1/3 of world deaths, I just read on the plane, a Yale professor calculated that 1/3 of annual deaths today is from the effects of poverty. And yet, where is the global uprising? So we know that under certain conditions we can be very neglectful in face of outrage. We know too that in certain conditions we can actually, not a few of us, but most of us, behave with incredible brutality. If you think of how many of you have ever heard of the Stanford prison experiment? Some of you have. Well, basically, normally tested young people were put into a mock prison setting in 1971 in Stanford, near where I was writing Diet for a Small Planet. And they had to stop the experiment within a few days because the guards were so brutally terrorizing the prisoners that later the professor who organized the experiment said it looked like Abu Ghraib, and these were normal kids. So whether it be when we are the guinea pigs in an experiment like that, or whether it is the history of the Holocaust, which wasn't, by the way, just a few madmen, but millions of people participating in one way or another, we have to face, and we're ready to face, I think, as a species, that under certain conditions, not a few, but most of us will behave very badly. And until we're tested, we don't know where we are on that register. So that's clear. But we also know that we are equally what I call soft-wired, just as we are soft-wired under certain conditions to behave with incredible cruelty. we're also soft-wired through eons of evolutionary time to have incredibly strong pro-social qualities. Why? Because 95% of our evolution was in tightly knit tribes. And if you read a brilliant anthropologist, Sarah Blaffer-Hardy, she will explain how we are the only species that cooperate so much in the rearing of our children and how this allowed us to develop these big brains. But it's that trust that is unique, that depth of trust, unique in our species. So we evolved, and I'm going to come back to this in just a moment, but we evolved very, very powerful positive qualities. So, it seems to me that we are soft-wired both for these deeply positive, whether it be cooperation, empathy, fairness. I'm going to give you some exciting examples of research on this in a moment. So the good news is not that we have these qualities. The really good news is that now in the 21st century, we have enough history and enough science to know what are the conditions that bring out the worst in us and what are the conditions that bring forth the best in us. Because we, with an eco-mind, title of my book, the eco-mind, we can see that we're like any organism in nature. So much depends on what is the context. You know, metaphorically, are we water? Do we get the right nutrients? Well, the social context and what does it bring out in our species. And so I think that we can be pretty clear that three conditions, I'm going to hazard, three conditions over our history have been shown to almost certainly bring out the worst in us. They are the concentration of power, whether political or economic. They are culture of secrecy, anonymity, as we saw on Wall Street, where the slogan was, IBG, YBG, I'll be gone, you'll be gone. That meant that they knew they'd be out of there with their millions before anybody knew what happened. So we don't do well with secrecy. And third are cultures of blame, where we're saying, oh no, it's the Wall Street crooks, rather than where were we when the whole standards broke down and deregulation happened? What is our responsibility too in that? So I would say there are three conditions then: the concentration of power, secrecy, and a culture of blame. Under those conditions, most of us do pretty badly. So you know what? I believe that part of the extraordinary thing about being alive in this moment is that we, for the first time, can really get a clear-headed look at this. And we can actually then say, okay, we know what brings out the worst of us, and therefore we know what to do. We can flip these conditions that bring out the negative, and we can be pretty sure that most of us will behave in a more cooperative and problem-solving way together. And that gives us tremendous guidance. And then we start to see the power that we all have. The power that we all have to create continuous dispersion of power, the first condition. So we continuous dispersion of power, which, by the way, isn't just about what somebody else does. It's the kind of power that you are creating. That is helping to disperse power by the very ingenuity, creativity, and hard work that you're engaged in. So, number one, in terms of transparency, demanding, as in my own feeble way, this Oxford University Press petition is about transparency. We can call on that in every aspect of our lives, give the evidence for everything that we are doing, and being willing to be in constant dialogue about the iteration of knowledge. And we can also, the third condition, stop scapegoating anyone and recognize that if we're all connected through an ecological worldview, then we're all implicated. And we all have power to make change, therefore. So that's the kind of beginning of solutions to what I see emerging, is the ecological worldview that is displacing this worldview based on the three S's, I call them, of separateness, stasis, things are fixed, and scarcity, worst of all. And we're moving into what I think of as the three C's of seeing the world. Of course, ecological sciences and our own experience tell us that we're always connected to one another. In nature, there is nothing static. Everything is a continuous change. And the reality is not scarcity, but possibility.